by now. Good afternoon, everyone. What a wonderful crowd. Welcome to the Metropolitan Planning Council. Just delighted that we have such an energetic and well-informed and civic-minded group here this morning. Welcome to our 5th annual Transform Illinois Awards celebration. It is really hard for me to believe and hard for us to believe it was just 5 years ago that we sat around a table as a group and discussed what we could do to get the subject matter of government efficiency and consolidation on the radar screens of lawmakers, elected officials, and government leaders from all over the state. Every year, I think we make remarkable progress on achieving the goals of Transform Illinois, and I'm grateful to our partners and everyone here today. My name is Dan Cronin. I'm chairman of the DuPage County Board. And I would especially like to thank our hosts, the Metropolitan Planning Council, for our continued use of this wonderful space, this conference space. And we hold our quarterly Transform Illinois meetings right here in this same room, where we discuss some of the most interesting and challenging issues that we face as a region, no doubt. I am so happy to partner with MPC and the other 11 organizations that comprise Transform Illinois. I'd also like to thank our legislators who took the time to be with us today, and especially this year's 2 Transformer Award recipients, Senator Sue Rezin and Representative Rita Mayfield, who showed great courage this past session, tackling one of the toughest issues in our legislative menu of things you could get immersed in is probably the toughest one, and that is education reform, right? The word education itself has a lot of meaning, right, for those people who've been around and understand, which is virtually everyone in this room. As chairman of the Senate Education Committee myself many moons ago, I can attest to the difficulty inherent in any attempt to change the status quo in public education. We also welcome Senator Don DeWitt, our 2017 Transformer Award winner, and Representative Sam Yingling, who is not here yet, but I think he should be here soon, because he's been a leader in the issue of consolidation and government efficiency in Springfield. We really appreciate his good work. So, and he's immersed in tackling another tough issue, and that is property tax reform. How do you like that? So between public education reform and property tax reform, these are like really monumental. Like climbing Mount Everest is probably easier, but in any event, they will be joined by Aaron Ailman, the newly appointed executive director of CMAP, who we all are honored to have with us this morning. So before we get started, I'd like to express my appreciation, our appreciation to our sponsor today, Commonwealth Edison, ComEd. This is the 3rd year that ComEd has stepped up and supported this conference, and I'd like to introduce Rommel Noguera, the Director of External Affairs, to say a few words. Rommel is responsible for outreach to local governments and community organizations for ComEd, is a board member of Open Lands, one of the oldest conservation organizations in the nation. Rommel.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Chairman stated, my name is Rommel Noguera, Director of External Affairs at ComEd, and we are pleased to sponsor today's 5th annual Transform Illinois conference. And our Senior Vice President, Melissa Washington, who some of you may know, she sends her warmest regards. She wasn't able to be here today and therefore asked me that if I could make some brief remarks on her behalf. So I know that many of you know that ComEd is not a small enterprise. In fact, we have a large footprint in our state. Our service territory encompasses about 11,000 square miles in northern Illinois, where we serve more than 70% of the population of the state, which represents more than 4 million customers, including residential, businesses, and municipalities. And with that significant footprint, and that significant presence in our communities, it is very important for us to continue to engage and partner with organizations such as Transform Illinois. Organizations who share a common goal and advocate for the improvement of the needs of our communities, whether it's through affecting change for a more efficient government, or in our case, more efficient and effective management of a major power grid, such that in the end of 2018, ComEd was recognized as the #1 operator of a power grid in the nation. So not only that, but we also engage with our stakeholders and our customers regarding our programs that benefit the communities. And one of these programs is energy efficiency, where our customers not only save money, but we also contribute together to the energy-saving goals of the state of Illinois. So just to give you some numbers, since 2008, when the energy efficiency program started, through the beginning of 2019, our customers have saved more than $3.8 billion, and we want to continue to grow that number. And therefore, I just want to call your attention to the common education table that is just outside in the lobby. If you could stop by when you have an opportunity to learn more about our energy efficiency programs, that would be delightful. So with that, we look forward to participating in these very engaging topics and discussions that are in the agenda. So thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So what brings us here today? Well, I think it's simply we're here because we're about changing the culture of our government. Transform Illinois is a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers, local leaders, civic organizations, and research institutions dedicated to promoting and supporting local government efficiencies. We also work to expand awareness of the economic impact of the current structure of government and to advocate for a smarter, more streamlined approach. We achieve this through research, advocacy, legislative, and policy implementation activities throughout the state. This year's conference examines the relationship between the size of local government and Illinois' high property tax burden. We all know that Illinois has more units of local government than any other state in the nation, by far. But we also know that just consolidating or dissolving a unit of government doesn't automatically save taxpayers money. The public service still needs to be delivered, and so the question becomes, is there a more cost-effective way to provide the service, perhaps through a partnership, an IGA, intergovernmental agreement, or some other kind of shared service model? We also will examine potential solutions toward reducing the high cost of school administration in this state. The Metropolitan Planning Council completed a study earlier this year that indicated Illinois spends double the national average per pupil in general administration spending. So can we reduce this amount and repurpose those dollars into the classroom? I look forward to our discussion and hope you will leave here today with a new perspective, or an energized perspective, and some valuable tools that will benefit your organization. It's now my privilege to introduce Metropolitan Planning Council President Mary Sue Barrett, who will present this year's Transformer Awards.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's terrific to see this full room about really critical issues, as Chairman Cronin outlined for us. We have been at this together for a number of years, and we know about the power of collaborations to move an agenda. We also know about how momentum builds, especially when there's a spark of crisis, and I think we are at that moment. I think that's why you are here. We know we need to make deeper progress, faster progress, and it's going to take all of us. So we always like to recognize some folks who have been our partners taking that bold action, and we call it our Transformer Awards, being Transform Illinois, but also that you have to kind of reinvent yourself. Remember those Transformer dolls, toys? So our Transformers are truly magical. They can take whatever form is necessary when they're talking to their constituents, the media, elected officials, their colleagues, and bring others along with them to transform change in Illinois. So we are really excited to honor these two legislators, and we're going to invite them up after I give you a little bit of introduction for a panel discussion that I think will help us launch into the next phase of work. So our first Transformer Award winner is Representative Rita Mayfield. She represents the 60th District, which is Waukegan, and is that district's first African-American female legislator. She was elected in 2010, and she started her political career, no surprise on the topic we're focusing in on with these awards, on education advocacy. So she was a founding member of a group called Citizens, organized for school board leadership, and that led to her running for the Waukegan School Board, where she served for a number of years, including 2 as vice president. During the 2019 spring legislative session, Representative Mayfield sponsored a bill called House Bill 3053, and what it would do is establish a school district efficiency commission to examine the number of school districts in the state and determine where reorganization and realignment could be more cost-effective. I'll give you one guess to know what happened to this piece of legislation. It passed the House and
Failed in the Senate.
ding. Stalled in the Senate.
By design.
But with a representative like Rita Mayfield, we know what will happen next, which is that she's going to stick with it. She's going to come back and try again next session. We are very proud to be associated with you as a strong advocate for increasing the quality of education and improving the lives of those least fortunate in our communities. That social justice mission is very important to everyone in Illinois and to our future growth. So Representative Mayfield, thank you so much for your leadership, ongoing efforts. Our values here at Transform Illinois are transparency and efficiency and accountability, and that's exactly why we are pleased to give you this award today. And I've got another one. So Senator Sue Rezin is our next Transformer Award winner. Her district is the 38th Senate District, and the issue of school district efficiency is one of her top priorities. Around her community of Morris, Illinois, which is approximately 15,000 residents, there are, count them, 3 elementary school districts and 1 high school district. This is not unusual in Illinois. And I know you're a mother of 4, so you care personally, deeply about these issues of efficiency and quality education for everyone in your district and for everyone statewide. And it's your passion for youth and commitment to providing more resources to the classroom that led you to sponsor this year's Senate Bill 1287, which would permit voters to initiate a referendum to share the services of a superintendent or another administrator. Sounds so logical that you could do this. And any savings realized would be divided between classroom needs and property tax relief, which is also very appealing. And I'll give you the same guess. What happened to her bill? Passed the Senate and stalled in the House. Thank you. So this is the work. This is the work that we need to do. Both of these pieces of legislation are needed. Both are have broad support, and they need us to move these forward. So we are so grateful to have someone like Senator Sue Rezin as our partner and advocate. I know that she's going to also pursue this legislation in this coming year. Your leadership in the Senate Republican team is also critical to our efforts, which are bipartisan. As you focus your time on making government more effective for the citizens of Illinois, we are pleased to award you with our Transformer Award for your commitment to transparency, efficiency, and accountability in government. Thank you so much for your leadership. And to lead this discussion, those of you who are, like me, a fan of Madeline Dubeck will be delighted that she agreed to moderate this discussion. Madeline has been a colleague and friend for many years. She is a passionate, longtime advocate for improving both government and our politics in Illinois. She was already at the Transform Illinois table because her former employer was the Better Government Association, which is one of our key partners here. She was the vice president of policy for BGA, and while there, she worked on a new law that limited golden parachutes for public sector executives. She's also worked, her work has also at the BGA included stopping efforts to limit government transparency and boosting laws that help government efficiency. And prior to that, one of the things that brought her into the civic sector, which I'll tell you about in a second, was her longtime work as a journalist. So 32 years in journalism. Many of you know her from her work at the Daily Herald, covering local and state government and politics. And she's won several regional and national journalism awards, no surprise. And she brought all of that experience to her leadership now as executive director of Change Illinois, which is very exciting. And we have welcomed with open arms Change Illinois' participation along with our other partners in Transform Illinois. So Madeline, thank you for your leadership, for you being a change maker, and for leading this conversation. Madeline Dubeck.
Thank you, Mary Sue, for that lovely introduction. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
How are you? Good. There's my dear friend Lawrence Massal smiling at me. That's always nice to see.
Just the
From
beginning.
the Civic Federation. Just the beginning of him smiling at me?
Well, the program has started.
All right, well, let's jump right in, shall we? We have two stellar transformers in our midst here who are, as Chairman Cronin alluded to earlier, trying to climb Mount Everest with taking on school efficiency and school consolidation and streamlining in Illinois. And so we are certainly grateful for that. Mary Sue gave a very good quick synopsis of both of the pieces of legislation they're sponsoring and pursuing and will pursue again in January. So let me ask each of you to just start out. We'll start with Representative Mayfield talking a little bit about why you proposed this legislation and what makes it transformative.
Well, let me just start by saying I thought my bill was pretty much common sense, and I guess that's where I failed. Property taxes, as we all know, the majority of your property tax bill goes to the school district. And the one complaint I get consistently when I go door to door is my property taxes are too high. What can you do to reduce my property taxes? And trying to explain to them that it's the school district, you know, not the state. It goes in one ear and out the other. All they want to know is, what are you going to do to reduce my taxes? So when we started talking about, okay, well, what can we seriously do to look at the taxes for the school district? How can we look for efficiencies? The bill, basically what it does, it says, okay, we're going to look at all the school districts across the state. We're going to look at all of them, and we're going to look at
852 of them.
Yes, that's not that many. We can do it. We're going to put together a panel, look at them, look at the districts, and see where did it make the most sense for a consolidation to take place. Where would taxpayers get the most bang for their buck should their districts decide to consolidate? And then we were going to do something truly transformative. We were going to share that information with the public. I know, transparency, you know, it's a bad word. But, you know, we were going for that. We were going for transparency. And you would have thought that I was trying to take the firstborn child of every administrator in the state when we mentioned the word transparency. They fought us tooth and nail. That's why the bill did stall in the Senate. The administrators came out strong. The unions that were supportive of the bill in the House all of a sudden turned against it in the Senate. They got the School Management Alliance to file slips. They got ISB on board to file slips in opposition. Everybody that they could think of, and their main goal was they did not want transparency. They did not want the districts, the taxpayers in those school districts, to know that there was an opportunity for consolidation and an opportunity to maybe save some money down the road on their tax bills because you wouldn't have all these automatic levies just piling up on and on top of them year after year. So that is where we're running into our biggest roadblock, and it is the transparency piece. There is no forced consolidation in the bill. There are no mandates in the bill. All the bill says is we will look at it and we will inform the public of an opportunity. That is all the bill does, and it's a great bill.
So Senator Rezin, tell us a little bit about what you think is so appealing about your approach.
Well, let me give you a little bit of history. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Metropolitan Planning Council for hosting this today. Chairman Cronin, thank you for your leadership on this topic. And I would be remiss if I did not thank Adam Slade. Raise your hand, I know you're hiding here, who was very instrumental in helping to take an idea that I had 3 years ago, and he did some research on behalf of Metropolitan Planning Council. His research paper, his white papers were incredibly important in moving this bill last year, so hopefully we'll finish it this year. So thank you, Adam, for that. For the several years ago, for 4 years, I sat on the Education Funding Commission to look at changing the education funding formula across the country, or excuse me, across the state. For 4 years, we worked on that topic. We had experts come in and talk to us about the importance of all of these different issues because of, and one thing that stuck in my mind when these experts came in to talk to us, several experts said that there's a better end result if you have a continuum of curriculum from K through 12. So as we talked about all of these topics and how to properly fund school districts, we looked at the cost of administration. One thing that did pop out to me, and let me just go through a few of these facts that will help put everything into perspective. I know that there's some, can you hear? I hear a little feedback, maybe that's better. State of Illinois spends over $1 billion on general administration expenses for school administrators. In the state, we're the only state in the country that spends over $1 billion in for school administration. Illinois spent 33% more in school administration than California, despite California having 3 times the number of students. If Illinois would spend on administration the same cost that the average cost across the country is, we would save $645 billion. Those are real numbers. That's a huge amount of money. There's 852 school districts. Of them, there are 200 school districts that are considered unit school districts, which we'll talk about a little bit as I go through. The state of Illinois spends over $500 per student in school administration, compared to the 4 other states. New York spends $300, Texas $129 per student, California $95 per student, and Florida spends $78 per student in school administration because of different policies that they've put into effect to streamline the administration. So the goals here are twofold. One is to have better outcomes for our school districts while we save money. What my bill does, it allows for taxpayers to, by referendum, put on the ballot, should we share school administration in what would be considered a unit school district, a single school district. And again, my bill made it out of the Senate. It was difficult. Obviously, the school administration opposed the bill for numerous reasons. But we did get it to the House where it was taken and held captive and killed. So this year, though, this is my 3rd year of carrying the bill. I do feel better about the bill, and I'll tell you there's several reasons why. The first year I carried this bill, I didn't have anyone support or oppose the bill. So everybody in the Education Committee was trying to figure out what does this bill do? The second year, I had the support of the unions, and that was this past year. And then I also had this research, the white papers that were done by the Metropolitan Planning Council, that Adam came in and he did a great job testifying, and he came in with facts, with this data about what's happening with the high cost of school administration. That was tremendously valuable for that. And Chairman Cronin had a very good press conference where we all spoke, and it just helped to propel the topic in the media. So I'm hopeful this time around, third time's the charm, I'm hoping this time around we'll be able to get the bill passed.
So Chairman Cronin talked about Mount Everest, and that's really what we're facing here with school consolidation. This is, as we said, 850-some school districts. Only 200 of them are unit districts, or roughly 200. Yet it is what typically comprises 2/3 of our property tax bills. You've both talked about opposition from administrators. Representative Mayfield, your commission would include a representative from an administrative association, along with a principal and parents, and there's 20 people on your commission?
We tried to include everyone. We tried to be very inclusive because we wanted to be respectful when we were looking at these districts. But at the same time, if there was an opportunity where and we're not talking about where you're going to just save, $1,000. We're talking about where you're saving millions of dollars that will seriously impact someone's tax bill. It's going to impact the community, but in a positive way. You can take 2 schools, 2 elementary schools, put them together under one administrator, so you're not paying 2 administrative costs. That is not unreasonable to ask for. But from an administrative perspective, it's totally unreasonable because they care more about their jobs than they do about what's doing right for the communities. And that's where we were running into the bottom.
So how do you address that? Because it seems to me that you're both going to need to address that somehow.
Well, my approach may not have been the best one because I told the administrators that I was not there for them. I was there for my taxpayers. So, and they came out swinging. So I'm going to, maybe I will try to be a little bit nicer this time around. But in the end, I'm still there for the taxpayers. Our tax bills they're out of control. They are truly out of control. They're going up, they're not going down. When we were doing the evidence-based model and we had these administrators come before us, and some of them from very wealthy districts, where you had the elementary school district, you had a middle school district and a high school district, all 3 with separate administrators, all making well over $100,000 and some plus all the perks that go with that. And then saying that they're sitting on rainy day funds of $1 million or more, and they're continually levying. We asked the question, well, why are you still levying if you have all this money in your rainy day fund? And their response was, because we can. That's not the right answer. You're going to continue to take money from taxpayers who are struggling to pay their bills as it is, just because you can, not because you're thinking about doing what's best for the community, not because, you've already got money, so you're being greedy at this point. And you're not looking at what's best. You've already got a stellar science department. You've already got, the best football equipment for the kids. So it's not like you're really needing to increase taxes, but you're doing it because you can. And increasing those taxes, you're also increasing your salary. It's a gold mine for them. And then when you look at the administration, you can't just look at the administrator. You got to look at all of the administrative positions that they're creating along with it. They're building many fiefdoms on the taxpayer's back, and I have an issue with that.
Senator Rezin, how about you? Are you going to, a way to address the administrative problem? Please.
If I were a betting person, I would bet on Rita here next session. So that is the challenge that we have with so many school districts. They each have their own set of school administration. Now, I represent many small school districts, and the conversation about what needs to be done is challenging for the smaller school districts. I understand that. What's nice about my bill is, though, I've said, you're allowed to keep your schools, keep your levies, negotiate your teachers' contracts within that school. Most importantly, keep your mascot. We don't want to change your mascot. Very important. But take what would be considered a unit school district around the high school and have one set of administration for all of those schools. This is done, it's not rocket science, it's done in unit school districts all of the time, and they do fairly well. So, the challenge that we have, school boards can, and they'll tell you, we currently can do that. School boards can make the decision if they want to share administration. But what's missing here is the property taxpayer, who are consistently having to pay higher and higher property taxes, who consistently say, you're taxing us out of our home, we can't afford this. This bill gives the property taxpayer the ability to go by voter referendum, put on the ballot that we, and then all of the voters can vote whether to share school administration or not. So it's a referendum. And because of that, it's, it gives the power back to the taxpayers, who we hear from all the time regarding their high property tax bills.
Representative Mayfield, let me challenge you a little bit. Those of us who've watched government in Illinois over the years have seen a lot of commissions come and go without much ever having been achieved or accomplished. How does your bill make sure that doesn't happen again?
Well, and I think that is another contentious point with the administrators, is because I refuse to allow, a lot of the commissions that you're speaking of, what they do is they generate a report and they'll mail it to myself, to the senators, to the governor, and it goes in a pile on someone's desk. Nobody reads those. You've wasted time. It's just, it doesn't go anywhere. They don't do anything. So I want mine, again, back to transparency. Let's form the commission and let's take the findings and put them out there in a very transparent manner. I also wanted mine to go to a referendum to those areas, to those taxpayers, to say, this is what we found. These are the potential cost savings if you were to consolidate your school districts. This is what you're looking at. Very transparent, and they can vote it up or down. They can say, we like our schools the way we are. We're okay with our taxing system. We're going to vote no. Or they can say, you know what? You're looking to save me, $5 million. I'll take that. I'm going to vote yes. Consolidate my schools. I'm okay with that, because we're not mandating that you close any schools. We're saying, okay, let's look at reducing administration in some of these buildings and reducing the administration piece of it. We're saying, keep your mascots, because there's nothing in my bill that takes away a mascot, which is very important. I'm still having withdrawals over mine. So it's important. It's important to keep your mascots. But we're also saying, you're empowering the community, and I think that's important. So one of the compromises, because I went to some of the opposition and I said, okay, would you be okay, you don't want the referendum, you don't want to give taxpayers an opportunity to vote on this, would you be okay publishing it in a newspaper saying, okay, these are your potential cost savings, and then letting the community decide if they wanted to go to a referendum through the normal steps? They said absolutely not. They wanted it on an obscure website somewhere where nobody will ever see. So if you publish a report, you give me a copy of the report with a link to a website. How does the public get that? They weren't interested in getting it out to the general public. They weren't interested in the taxpayers knowing that there was a potential for efficiencies in their district. That's just wrong. So I'm like, no, if you can't work with me so that we can put this information out there so that the individuals that it is meant to affect know what's going on, then I can't, I'm going to keep pushing forward, because this is the right thing to do. We have to let individuals who are paying the salaries in the school districts know what their options are.
Representative, mascots have come up a couple of times now. And I think it seems like a silly thing. Every time we say the word mascot, everybody laughs. But it's not such a silly thing. People get really upset about this, and you just alluded to, you have a personal experience. Can you just tell everybody about that for a minute?
So Waukegan decided in the early 90s, that they were going to combine East and West Campus under one school. So what they did, they basically didn't change much. It went from East and West to Brookside and Washington. Okay, you changed the name of the school, and then they took our mascot. They took the mascot from West Campus, and they combined it with the mascot for East Campus. So the mascot for West Campus was a Raider, the pirate Raider. We were proud, we are the green, we are the gold, we're the Raiders, we're the bold. I still remember the song, okay? That's how tied to it I am. And then we had the Bulldogs, okay? Purple and gold, a little bulldog with a chain. We ran rampant over them. So they put together this commission. They did not let me on the commission when they were doing the consolidation of the schools and the mascot. I was very vocal about it. I wanted to keep my Raider. So what they chose to do was to give us a bulldog with a patch over its eye. Needless to say, show up at every game in my green and gold Raider gear because I will always be a Raider. So yes, mascots are important.
So mascots are important.
Yes.
That's one example of how difficult this becomes to do. When you threaten people's mascots, they take it seriously. Parents also don't want to have their kids bust cross-county, right? What about the kids in all of this, Senator Rezin? How do you make sure that the money that's saved, some of that is actually getting into the classroom? You've talked about being concerned with the change in the education funding formula in the last few years, that's not what's happening.
And so regarding, in my bill, you stay in your own school. So you're not being bused across to other schools. So you stay with your school, your levy's the same. Everything about that school district is the same, except for we share school administration. The challenges that we see locally when we've talked about this conversation is one school has a huge debt limit, if they've borrowed a lot to build a new school, while the other school districts within that, what would be considered a unit school district, do not have any debt. How do you handle that? One teacher's salary from one school is higher than the other teacher's salary in another school. It's very difficult to handle. I mean, those are true financial issues that, in our opinion, you would have to bring in money from the state to bring the lower salaries up to the higher salaries. So potentially it could cost money. So those are the challenges that we look at for that. But always the conversation about when there's new money coming into education, we want to make sure that that money gets into the classrooms. We spent many years on this education task force, and we talked about the importance of wraparound services, especially mental health. We're seeing more and more need in schools for mental health, and all of these wraparound services that cost more money. That's where the new money in the education funding formula should be going to, wraparound services and teachers in the classroom to help the teachers. So I've been frustrated because, and my colleagues have talked about when the new money has come in from the state, we put about $1 billion back into education in the past 3 years that is being used for superintendents or being used for administration or assistant superintendents. That's frustrating for us. So we'll look at, with our bill, half of the money can go back in the classroom, half of the money can go for direct property tax relief, which is something that resonates as well for the taxpayer. Absolutely.
So if we were living in a fantasy world and both of you saw your bills become law, typical taxpayer in your district, how much money do you think they would save in their tax bill? Just kind of, I know it's a stab in the dark. But.
Well, no, I can probably address that because I've got multiple districts in my district, multiple school districts in my district. So I represent Waukegan, North Chicago, Beach Park, Gurnee, and Wadsworth. Waukegan and North Chicago both have unit school districts. The other ones do not. So the difference in the tax bills, so let's say you have a $200,000 house in Waukegan. Your tax bill is roughly going to be about $4,500. That same $200,000 house in Gurnee, your tax bill is $9,000. So it's double. And that is the difference. And I'm seeing this in my own district, what the difference is from that lack of consolidation.
Oh, that's compelling.
Yeah.
So cut in half.
Cut in half.
Yes.
I don't have a specific example, but as you can imagine, when we have school administration at every school district, someone mentioned that in a small school district, the superintendent's being paid $100,000. I can tell you for a fact there's examples of a superintendent who has 100 kids and is making $200,000 plus benefits. I mean, this is going on across the whole state. So the issue needs to be looked at. Certainly, there's significant savings. The bill that, if we can get on the referendum and have, the bill pass, the taxpayers should be able to see fairly good property tax relief in several years. I mean, it takes a while to work through all of the contracts that we have to work through because it might be in the middle of contracts. Logistically, we have to figure out how to move them from where they are to shared services, but that's what the regional superintendent will be able to do in my bill. They don't know that yet, but they will be helping.
So talk about Texas a little bit, Senator Rezin. You had somebody come talk to you about that through a mutual friend. You talked to an expert in Texas. Tell us what the situation is like there.
Well, Texas is doing this currently. Texas spends very little money compared to Illinois on school administration, and they have taken a broader look at how to streamline administration. They're looking at bringing in municipalities. Sometimes states go by county. Can you imagine that? If we went by county or just by regions, logistic regions. But you know, this particular Dr. Randu, who I spoke with, he's the superintendent of a school district that has, I would say, between 20 and 40,000 students. And they also then break down their administration, not according to who they think they will need or an arbitrary hire, but they have metrics in place per student, right? And you touched on this too, Adam, per student. So population, you know, for every 500 students in a school, they would have a principal. In every high school would have 2,000. I mean, there's science behind the breakdown of administration in all of their schools to ultimately have the best performance, and that's ultimately what they want to do. But they've shown by streamlining administration in Texas, they've significantly cut down on the cost of administration.
Representative Mayfield, your commission would have 20 members, if I recall correctly. Does that sound right?
That's
and
right.
11 of them would need to agree
Correct.
to get something out there to the public.
Right, and they've still fought that, even with such a wide, because we want it to be inclusive. We were not trying to leave anybody out. When you start talking about consolidations, when you start talking about, you know, anything to do with children, you want to have as many voices at the table as possible. You want to give everybody an opportunity to look at what, you know, how we can best serve the children, because that's what it's about. It's about the children. How do we best serve them? So we wanted to be very inclusive, bring everybody there, and even with that full breadth of individuals, we still can't get the buy-in that we need, because many of the people that we're inviting to the table are fighting us, and that makes no sense. It's like we're giving you a voice at the table, and they're still saying no, and their biggest objection is the transparency piece. They tell us, you take out the transparency piece and we'll be okay. I'm not taking out the transparency piece. That makes no sense.
Do they give a reason for wanting to take out the transparency piece?
Well, they're okay with the website, putting the information on a website and letting individuals go and find it. No, that's not the way we do things. So that's where we are. The issue is transparency. And taxpayers have a right to know that they have an opportunity to for efficiencies. They have an opportunity, you know, to reduce their taxes. Even if it's not the first year, it could be the third or the fifth year. But there's still that opportunity, and they need to know what it is. And then they can vote it up or down. I believe in putting power in the hands of the taxpayer.
Senator Rezin, you talked about getting union support in the second year. Can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to make that happen?
Well, I went to the unions and I explained my bill, and I explained the intent of the bill is truly to get more money into the classroom and to help provide property tax relief. So take your savings and split the savings, put more, which will free up more money for the classrooms, which the teachers' unions supported, and then also take the other half for immediate property tax relief. And so it was valuable once they went on the bill and supported the bill, because when the committee comes that we're testifying before, the first thing that the committee, Education Committee, would do when you're presenting a bill is to see who supports the bill, see who opposes the bill, right? You know, Carol, right? It's just like,
Oh, yes.
who's on this bill? So it was valuable the first year. However, they didn't work it. I mean, it wasn't their top priority because they had many other issues that they were trying to move through that session. My hope is this session, again, with the collaboration from the Metropolitan Planning Council, Adam's, the research that you've done here, and the coverage we've had in the media has tremendously helped and started a conversation that needed to be started. And most people just don't know about these facts until we put them out there.
Either of you, are there more things we can do to incentivize the opponents to want to do this?
I how do you incentivize a administrator to want to voluntarily give up their job? I think that's where it comes down to. They're more interested in it's job security. End of the line, that's what it comes down to, is job security for them, as opposed to doing what's right and putting more money into the classrooms. They know what our end goal is. They know that our goal is to do just what Senator Rezin said, put the money in the classrooms, provide that property tax relief. But they're like, okay, that's fine, just don't do it here, you can do it over there. It doesn't work that way. We're looking at everywhere. Anywhere that there's an opportunity where there is substantial efficiencies, we should be pursuing those. It is in the best interest of everyone in the community and throughout our state. We really do need to look at that. I love Senator Rezin's bill, the fact that they are staying in their schools, and that was one of the objections, that the unions had when my bill went to the Senate, is that there was a possibility of closing down schools. And I'm like, well, there's nothing in the bill that says we're closing any school. But that was what the false rhetoric that they were getting from the administrators. If you sign on to her bill, if you agree with her bill, that she's going to close your schools. No, I'm not trying to close the schools. I'm just trying to get rid of that extra layer of administration that we truly don't need. I have an issue with administrators. I will admit that. I'm going to start with, and I'm going to just veer just a tiny bit. Please bear with me. My local administrator for Waukegan just spent $700,000 of evidence-based funding model dollars. This money was directed toward the education for educational purposes to buy herself. She wants a new office. She doesn't like the office where she's at. So that $700 is going to go to buy a building that requires an additional $6 to $7 million worth of renovations before she can even move in. How does that benefit our children? This is why I get so upset. This is why I get so passionate, because our administrators are out of control. They are out of control. This is not their money. These are taxpayer dollars. I pay taxes. I own my home. And I don't like the way my money is being squandered. I don't like looking at my school report card and seeing that my grades are going down and not up, but yet we are frivolously spending all these dollars. So this is why I get on my high horse, you may say, when it comes to issues like this, because this is extremely important. We need to be fiscally responsible, and we need to look at where those dollars are going, and the taxpayers need to know how their money is being spent. Everybody can't make it to those school board meetings.
Don't you wish Representative Mayfield had a little more passion? Me too.
Well, I agree with her. I would have to say, since we have in the past 3 years put over $1 billion of new money into education, so that was the commitment when we passed a new funding formula. It was bipartisan. We all agree we need new money coming in. The way to incentivize what needs to happen here is not, taking a negative approach, in my opinion. You have new money coming in, and you have unit school districts, and they receive X amount of money according to the multiplier or whatever that figures out how much money they get. I believe some of the new money that comes in should be, or more of the new money that comes in should be given to the unit school districts, and less of the money to the dual school districts. Should you choose to say dual or more than a dual school district, that's fine. You're going to get what you're currently getting, but you're not going to get more of the new money coming in. But if you're a unit school districts taking the appropriate steps, then let's reward better behavior.
I like that.
So I've got one last question, and then we're going to turn it to you for your questions for a few minutes, okay? So get ready with those questions. But the big question that I want to be sure we get to before I turn it over to the audience is, how can everyone in this room who supports your legislation help you to get it passed?
Reach out to your senators, reach out to your representatives, and let them know that you want them, you expect them to stand up for the citizens and not for the administrators, because it comes down to the taxpayers all day, every day. Whether you're a representative or a senator, you're out there knocking on the doors, you're hearing the same thing over and over. Our tax bills are too high. My tax bill is too high. I say it, and I'm a representative. I look at my bill, I get upset. My tax bill is too high. What can we do to reduce the tax bills, keep people in their homes? Nobody should be taxed out of their home. that there's a problem when that happens. So reach out to your senators, reach out to your representatives, ask them to support the legislation. It's good legislation. It's transparent legislation.
I agree, and the support of everyone in this room, you're all leaders by your own right in this room. So if you pick up this topic and start pushing whatever you see up here that you feel is important, it's tremendously valuable for us, and it just helps to tell our story so we feel like we're not the only one telling the story, no one's listening. Once you talk about the statistics, like I've talked to you about today, most people do not realize we spend over $500 on average per student in the state of Illinois for school administration, compared to $100 in Florida, $210. I mean, it's just crazy numbers. It's such an outlier. So start the discussion. It helps us in Springfield.
All right, I know we've got some questions out there. If you could, we got a gentleman in the back, Adam, in a navy blue blazer. Wait 1 second for Adam to come to you, please, so we can get this on the record and be transparent.
Hi, my name is Ted Brisky. I'm from River Forest, previously from Oak Park. What about the school boards and all this? So we had this big thing in Illinois about local control. So we got the school boards who negotiate contracts for goods, for unions, and we have policy control with the curriculum. So how might these issues of consolidation affect the ability of the school boards to control the local curriculum and the local budget?
Do you mean the rubber stamp boards? Those boards?
Well, all right, so.
That's right.
In Oak Park and River Forest, there are no rubber stamp boards.
Okay.
So your classic case, that board should not have.
I agree.
Okay.
Thank you.
But nevertheless, we have school boards. We got 852 of them, I guess. So what's their role, either for or against this? Because I can see they might be a little confused as to the marching orders they give to their superintendent. And the superintendents can say, well, now we've combined 3 districts and I got 3 bosses.
Let's let them answer the question, thanks.
Okay, and I'm glad you raised that question, because one of the options when I was dealing with some of the opposition when the bill was in the Senate was, okay, because the local control did come up. They were saying that the bill, because it goes directly to the ballot and bypasses the school board, takes away their local control. I said, okay, so how about if we give the school board an option? They can either send it to referendum or they can publish it in the newspaper. Give them an option. We're not taking away local control, but we're giving them an option of what to do with the information. The answer was still no.
I would say the best form of local control is a referendum, the ability to put a referendum on the ballot by a property taxpayer who's concerned about their property tax bill. For my bill, yes, you're correct. The school boards continue to decide what's going on in their school, and they would work with one set of administration. I hope that, that they could come to a consensus. I feel that if a referendum passes, the taxpayers are saying, we want you to come to a consensus, and we want for you to look at the curriculum and make sure it's aligned from K all the way up to, from kindergarten all the way up to high school.
More questions? Yes, sir, in front here, Adam, with the light blue shirt. Passing the microphone up.
I like the senator's answer about the money going to unit districts. So I have a couple of questions. One is, how do you get that to happen? Number 2, if California can spend, I don't know, 20, whatever it was, $100 a student, do they have better technology? What can we learn from the states that spend less money for administration that they do to allow them to do that? Because I assume the administration is fairly good. It's not just that there is none. So there must be things they're doing that allow them, if it's technology or whatever, to run their school districts at a less expensive cost.
So I don't know specifically what California has done, but what many states have done when they have streamlined their school administration, again, as they've looked at, they put in place these metrics. We will have a set of, like a principal for every school that has 500 students. We will have a superintendent that will oversee all of it. So as opposed to an arbitrary kind of decision locally, well, we need our own curriculum director, our own because we have a lot of assistant superintendents now, if you haven't, and I'm not against superintendents, my mom's a retired superintendent, just so you know. And when I had this conversation with her, this is many years ago, but when I had this conversation with her, she said absolutely, she agrees as well. So, there are metrics that best practices show for administration in terms of how much administration you should have to be effective. Texas has done it as well, and that's what Dr. Randall from Texas talked about. And I think if we follow those practices, it would allow us to put administration into place that will be the most effective, have the most effective outcomes, while yet not costing a lot of money.
Time for one more quick question. Lawrence Massal.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative and Senator, for all of your work pushing up against the Mount Everest of indifference it sometimes feels in terms of change. I guess my question is a little more on what you face among your colleagues in the General Assembly. Is there a recognition among your colleagues that there is a problem and that there is need for significant change? And are they compelled by evidence of other states doing it differently than Illinois?
Well, I know when I was running the bill through the House, I had to keep explaining the bill to the individuals on the committee. And there were some that were, I agree with you, we need to do this, but my administrator is breathing down my neck, so I can't vote for the bill. So I'm like, okay, well, can we sub you off? Can I get somebody on here that, will vote whose administrator isn't breathing down their throat? But I think they got it because once it hit the floor, it flew out of the House without a problem. But then we ran into the same problem in the Senate where the administrators were putting so much pressure on the senators in the committee. We missed it by one vote getting it out of Senate committee, one vote. So that's why I'm saying if you can reach out to your senators, it really does make a difference because that one vote, had it hit the floor, I believe that bill would have passed out and been on the governor's desk.
So what I did for my colleagues, because they, as you can imagine, were receiving many phone calls from their superintendents about why my bill was so bad, I had a breakdown by our staff, list every senator and all of the school districts and the amount of administration that was spent in their Senate district, and that was an eye-opener. For all of the senators, they had no ideas. Upwards of $20 million plus per Senate district was being spent on school administration. So again, we just have to take the time to educate regarding a conversation that's just beginning. We're hoping this year we'll have better luck, but many of these numbers in the papers showing what's being done in other states has been incredibly beneficial.
All right, how about a wonderful round of applause for our Transformer Award winners? They might need a badge of courage award soon, too. We've got another terrific panel for you coming up on the future of property tax reform with two, I believe, former Transformer Award winners. And Carol Portman is going to lead the conversation. Carol is president of the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois. She has been since 2013. The Taxpayers Federation of Illinois supports sound tax policy and fiscal practices that encourages economic growth in Illinois. Carol is a tremendous tax expert. Thank goodness she's leading this conversation and not me. She served as corporate tax counsel with Ameritech and Waste Management Corporation and at McDermott, Will and Emery. And she's also a former chair of the Federation. So please welcome Carol Portman.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. All right, why don't you guys come on up, my panel. I've got three people, and I think it's going to be a really exciting conversation we're going to have. We had a little preliminary conversation a week or two ago, and I think it lasted longer than the panel's supposed to be. We just had so much fun talking to each other. So I meant to bring my phone up, so someone start waving at me when I got about 5 minutes left. I think that between them and me and you all, we're going to have a really exciting conversation. We have up here, let's see, to your right, we've got Erin Ailman. She is, as Chairman Cronin mentioned, the new head of what we call CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. Although she's new as head, but she was there a few years ago earlier in her career, so I suspect she hit the ground running, and the folks there haven't missed a step. And then next to her, we've got two, they're well equipped, I think, to have a conversation about property taxes right now, because they're both on the revenue committees, the prospective revenue committees of their respective chambers, and then they're also serving on the property tax relief task force. Not easy for me to say. We've got Senator Don DeWitt from St. Charles and Representative Sam Yingling. Got a name change today. Both of them, again, are tax, I don't want to say experts, but smarter than your average bear when it comes to taxes. And so I think, and especially after the task force has been meeting with, let's just say, some regularity over the course of the past few weeks. So my first question, I'm going to ask just each of you to share what you think. What is the most important thing that the state can do to reform the property tax system? And I guess maybe first we should ask, do you think the property tax system needs to be reformed? I guess an honest answer could be no, it's good. I'm guessing that's probably not going to be your answer, but you have the opportunity to say that that's the case. What do you think is the most important thing that needs to be done? And I guess we'll start ladies first, so we'll start with Erin down to the other end.
Well, from my perspective, I think that, yes, something needs to be done, but I think getting it right requires us to be thoughtful about what it is that we want, the services that we want from our governments to provide, and sort of re-baselining and almost taking sort of a zero-based budgeting approach to what it is that we're doing here and why we're talking about property tax reform, and level the playing field, too, for communities that don't have necessarily the tools available to them to be able to do anything other than raise their property taxes.
Senator DeWitt?
Thank you. Thanks to MPC for hosting this afternoon. It's probably the number one subject that I face at virtually every coffee town hall meeting that I attend in my district. Everybody knows the spring session was very busy. There was a lot that went on, and all of us have been doing a lot of outreach this summer, just kind of letting people know what transpired. But the number one issue in my district is property tax relief. I have all LUDA school districts in my district out in the western suburbs, including U46 Elgin, which I believe is the second largest district in the state, and the District 300, which is either number 4 or 5, depending on which list you look at. So these are significant issues that are facing my property tax owners in my district. I was pleased to be appointed to the task force with my legislative counterpart, Representative Yingling. We've had some interesting conversations, both on the record and off the record, with our task force. It's been a great, I think, bipartisan effort. We have an awful lot of work to do, and I think time will tell very quickly in the next few weeks whether we're going to be able to come up with some recommendations that are really going to have an effect, or whether this is just going to be, as somebody mentioned in the previous panel, just another one of those task force reports that kind of gets distributed to the legislature and nothing really happens.
And Representative Ling?
So my position is that the property tax system in the state of Illinois is an abusive and regressive form of taxation. It no longer represents the economic realities in which we operate, and Illinois is still trying to restructure its tax code. Many of our surrounding states started restructuring 15, 20 years ago as we started moving to a service-based economy. Real property no longer is an appropriate determination of one's ability to pay taxes. And that's one of the biggest issues that we see, especially within homeowners. If you think about it, for a lot of homeowners, maybe after 30, 40 years their home is paid for, their home is their largest capital asset, but it's not liquid. And under our tax system, our property tax system, we assume that the valuation of their fully paid for house can immediately be tapped for taxing resources. And I would argue that was never accurate, and I would argue that it especially is not accurate today. In order to actually resolve the property tax crisis, it's going to take some very heavy lifting by the legislature. We won't be able to solve this by just nibbling around the edges. What we have to really seriously look at is how we are funding education in the state of Illinois. And property taxes right now fund about $18 billion worth of K through 12 education funding. So we have to ask ourselves, do we want to continue funding schools through property taxes, which are a regressive and abusive form of taxation that is creating large amounts of insecurity within communities, especially with retirees wondering if they're going to be able to afford to stay in their home, which, by the way, is fully paid for because they're getting taxed out of it? Or is there a fairer, more diverse way that we can restructure our overall tax code and shift some of that property tax burden to other revenue sources? And that's one of the major things that we're looking at within the Property Tax Relief Commission, is where else can we look to identify that is fair and equitable funding for schools and move that off of property taxes? Again, it's going to be a very heavy lift. And I think the political willpower is there to finally address this head on. I think that there's a number of our colleagues in the General Assembly who recognize that nibbling around the edges isn't going to solve the problem, and it's just going to perpetuate it. So I'm cautiously optimistic. We've had some incredibly productive meetings with the commission, and like what Senator DeWitt said, we have a lot of work to do. But I'm cautiously optimistic we can actually achieve something substantive.
Okay, Aaron, that leads to the next question perfectly. Illinois relies more heavily on property taxes to fund state and local government services. In our case, it's fully local, but when you're comparing from state to state, you really have to add state and local revenues together because different states slice and dice it differently. But nevertheless, when you add it all up and you compare from one state to the next, how much of the total revenue source is coming from property taxes, Illinois is significantly above the average. Illinois, about 38%, last time I did the numbers, it was roughly 38% of total all-in state and local revenues come from property taxes, whereas the national number is 31%. So it's a pretty significant difference. And that includes states like New Hampshire and Texas that don't even have sales taxes or individual income taxes. So some of them clearly are relying very heavily. Anyway, I'm getting to the question here. So Aaron, does that make sense? Do you think that that's something that we can change, or should we change? And what are your thoughts on that?
So I think in getting ready to talk on the subject, I was really thinking about sort of coming back to the planning world and thinking about what a regional planning agency has to say about, property tax reform and just sales tax reform in general. As we're working with communities, it's really about those people that live in communities and how can we have a successful region and have people have the financial resources available to them individually to be able to be successful. And so when you have a system that's overly reliant on property taxes, on sales taxes being dispersed back to communities by the state, you create a series of winners and losers. So as we're working in local communities across the region, we're seeing communities that are over planning for retail because that's where they're receiving these monies back from the state. And as they're doing that, you inherently are sort of setting up again this internal conflict between different types of municipalities and also creating instability too as the economy changes. Retail, the way that we've known it, may not be the same as the retail is going to be in the future. So really, you've got land use decisions that communities are making that are really standing in the way of community residents getting exactly what it is what they want from their community planning processes, because they want to make sure that they're getting those sales taxes back from the state. And then also at the same time, the ones that aren't getting as much back from the state really then have no other option but to look at property taxes in order to fund the services that they need. So again, it's how do you address these bigger challenges that are structural issues across our region? But I do think that now seems to be sort of a good time to start having conversations with the public. I think the public really wants the transparency and really wants to have this conversation with their elected officials.
Both of you now are on the task force. I mentioned you're both chairs of the task force. These are 2 of the 88 members, I think, the last time we counted, members of the task force. So yeah, stop rolling your eyes. They're taking it seriously and they're working hard. But I'd like to have either one or both of you talk a little bit about what the task force is doing and how you think it's going. And how it's set up and how, just let people know the fun we've been having.
Yeah, right. Hasn't been a lot of fun yet, but hopefully we'll get there. Very briefly to the previous question, I took a different approach to this process, and Representative and I spoke about this even before it started. I've decided to take a position where I believe that we need to look harder at that equation of state funding of education versus the local piece of the pie. And I will share with all of you that a lot of the discussion that's been taking place on the school funding subcommittee, which is one of the subcommittees, one of 3 subcommittees that I sit on, most of the conversation has really been on the local side of the equation. And my sense is that it's starting to evolve around how can we limit, how can we cap, how can we handcuff local government to make them less abusive to taxpayers. You know, the Illinois Constitution is a wonderful document. I think people use it when they find it opportune. There are some segments of government that hide behind the Constitution when it's convenient, but people forget that when it comes to education funding, the Constitution says that the state of Illinois will be the primary source of funding in the state of Illinois. My energy in my subcommittee on school funding has kind of been pushing in that direction. We heard an outstanding presentation last Friday by Advance Illinois. Heather Stain's sister, her first name, Robin, thank you, I have a mental block with her, has an outstanding grasp of this entire local school funding equation. I've asked her to opine on what does a formula of a higher percentage, that 36 or 38% that you referred to, what does a number like 40 or 45 or even 50% like the Constitution says we should be doing look like, with a corresponding reduction on the local side of taxpayer indebtedness or taxpayer responsibility? If we're not going to make big changes in how we structure this, we're not going to have a significant impact on local property taxes. I think we have to get out of the box, look at some very big changes to the system in place, and that's where I'm kind of trying to spend my time on the state side of the equation rather than the local side.
So when we're talking about overhauling the property tax system, obviously that is a huge undertaking, especially when literally half the General Assembly is on the task force. So so in order to address that, we broke the task force into 7 subcommittees, which seems like a lot. But in managing the number of members who have interest in this, and also recognizing the intense amount of time that this undertaking will take, creating 7 subcommittees allowed for members to focus all of their energies on areas of the property tax law where they maybe are the most experienced or where they're interested in learning more. So the biggest one is school funding education. School education funding. Then there is another subcommittee is TIFs. Another one is exemptions and assessments. One is government consolidation. One is PTEL. One is social and economic disparities. And pensions. And pensions, thank you. Who could forget about the pension one? So we have those 7 subcommittees, and they're in various combinations are meeting daily. I actually, someone was nice enough to let me set up shop in one of the closets over at the Thompson Center for the past several weeks. So, which actually is much nicer than the rest of the building. But so we're looking at various approaches in each one of those subsections. And do you want me to expound upon like some of the ideas that we were talking about?
What we've been talking about.
So, and going to what Senator DeWitt had talked about, we have a system that incentivizes local taxing bodies to be abusive with the tax code. And I would argue that PTEL incentivizes taxing bodies to ask for more money than they need, and it punishes them if they don't do that. So one of the things that we're looking at in the PTEL subcommittee is say, all right, listen, PTEL in theory on paper is a good idea. You think it's going to provide some sort of tax, some predictable tax caps, but it just incentivizes the maxing out of everyone's levy. So one of the things that we're looking at PTEL is to say, all right, listen, why don't we do a clawback provision? So for those government bodies who are saying, we don't need to max out our levy this year. In fact, we don't need to max out our levy next year or the following year. We have enough money right now. We don't have a system that punishes them for that. But then also on the flip side, if we're going to give the government bodies the ability to do some variation of a clawback in PTEL, is to also give the residents the ability to put a referendum on the ballot to reduce the property tax rate. So that's just one of many components within the TIF subcommittee. One of the things that we're carefully looking at is the TIF districts in large part are just a mechanism to redirect education funding from schools into a development. And this is something that we're looking at carefully, especially in Chicago, where the majority of Chicago falls into a TIF district. And as a result, then, more education dollars go from the state government to CPS and don't make it to suburban districts and downstate districts. So looking at restructuring some of the TIFs. Now, there's been a ton of studies done on TIFs. So, you know, you can just go online probably and find a recent commission that did that. There are, looking at the assessments and exemptions, you know, how is the assessment process working? Is it fair? Is it equitable? One of the biggest things that we hear from our constituents is that they don't like property taxes because it's abusive and regressive, but they especially don't like it because they don't perceive it to be a fair system. They don't understand it. They don't understand why their neighbor next door, who maybe has a very similar home, is paying $1,000 less than they do. It is an overly complex system. So fairness and equitability within the system is something that we're carefully looking at. So those are just some of the basic overviews. And I'm happy to spend the next several hours talking about it, but I will spare you. So Carol, by the way, thank you very much for...
I go to way more of these than you would
I've
like.
seen more of Carol than I think I have my spouse in the past couple of weeks. But
Likewise. This question can go to any of you, I think. So the concept of tax reform, which is what the point of the task force is, and the previous panel talked about it too. The constituents clamor for, and Aaron is not immune to hearing about this also. Tax reform connotes tax reductions, and that's what everyone thinks about and what they want. But there is the fairness element that you just mentioned, Representative Yingling. But the problem is, if you reduce the amount of revenues coming in, are you running the risk of reducing the services being provided by those local governments? And how do you balance those? And you know, you talked about the option of a state supplement of state funding. I mean, is that something that you all think about? And I guess just curious what any of you, maybe we'll let Erin start because it's been a while since she's talked, or whoever.
Well, it's sort of twofold, right? It's about how do you redesign a system that works for everybody, but then how are you thinking about service delivery to constituents, right? What's necessary that government needs to or is expected to provide for its citizens? So 284 municipalities in the CMAP region, over 1,200 units of local government, right? Everything from mosquito abatement districts, library districts, you know, everything in that bucket. And so who is best suited to provide some of these services? We're seeing some great examples across the region of how local governments are already sort of coordinating their efforts without consolidating, right? So in Lake County, there's shared permitting responsibilities, and in the South Cook County, they're doing some innovative stormwater or sewage treatment center collaboration as well. So governments know that this is the right thing to do. And then there's simple things like procurements. But it's not just about sort of reforming the rules and leveling the playing fields. It's also about thinking about all of those things that we need to fund and that government is expected to fund. So, you know, for us as regional planners, it's hard to sort of say that, you know, just by consolidating services, like immediately overnight, taxpayers are going to go ahead and see a huge savings, right? It's going to take a lot of work from both ends of the spectrum to get us there.
Sure. Out in my district, District 33, we've had 3 local fire departments merge their services, East Dundee, West Dundee, and Carpentersville. They actually did this about 3 years ago, and they're kind of working through some of the bugs. The timing was right with regards to some of the management organizational structure of those departments. 1 or 2 of the chiefs was either retiring or stepping down. They're going through some growing pains right now. They haven't decided to discard the process yet, but it's one example. And Chairman Cronin has really been a champion in DuPage County, I have to add, with regards to government consolidation. We saw some legislation come through this spring with township consolidation. I'm not sure this was the best bill that got written in this last session. I didn't support it. I thought it was kind of a one-off bill that was really picking on one particular township in one particular county. I'd have felt better if the bill had been written for the entire state. And I probably would have supported it had it been written to encompass all of the various townships. And again, like the previous panel discussed, to put the decision into the voters' hands, to determine whether they believe they're getting the services that they're paying for through that particular form of government. I made the joke that one of the sponsors of this legislation, I hope they have a snowplow in their driveway. Because as someone mentioned earlier, it's not always about our services automatically being picked up and then there being an immediate savings to to the taxpayer. I sit on the pension subcommittee as well in the task force process. There's some good and bad coming out of it. We had our first and what sounds like our only subcommittee meeting last week on pensions, which is really unfortunate because it is the albatross around the state of Illinois' neck these days. And we're going to they want to hold off on any recommendations until the governor's task force, which has been working on this issue for over a year now, comes out with their recommendation. And then it looks like we'll probably just coordinate their recommendations into the task force work. Their work evolves around the consolidation of the 653 Tier 3 and Tier 4 downstate local police and fire pension funds that exist in this state, with 653 management firms and 653 accounting firms and 653 attorneys. It's become a cottage industry in some areas. Some of those services to those 653 funds could certainly be consolidated, literally saving hundreds of millions of dollars that drop right to the bottom line of taxpayers' property tax bills. Everyone's bill has all those lines on it for police pension and fire pension and park district pension and everything else. So we're making slow and steady progress, but we're continuing to work. And it will not be an overnight change to taxpayers. It will take some transition.
Representative Young, you mentioned this, I forget what the name of the subcommittee is, social equity or social justice or something. That, and if you look at the tax rates around the state and effective tax rates, when you're comparing the dollars in tax that are paid versus the value of the property, there's a huge discrepancy around the state. Some communities, taxes are super high, the tax rate, and some communities they're super low. And some of it may be a function of the unit versus dual school districts, but some of it's a function of how wealthy the community is and how much is in the tax value is in the tax base to spread out the costs. And unfortunately, we see there are a lot of struggling communities that are struggling financially. Some of them have the highest tax rates. So if you're barely making ends meet as a community, the people who live there tend to be frequently people who are likewise barely making ends meet, and yet they're having to pay more tax than some of the people in some of the wealthier communities. Do you have anything to say about that? I mean, I haven't been able to go to those subcommittee hearings, and so I don't know what kind of conversations they're having. What do you think that we can or should be doing as a state to help straighten out some of those? Or can we? Should we? Make a change there.
And thank you for the question. That's really good. And I think this underscores the inequity within our property tax system. What we consistently find across the state is that communities, minority communities, are paying higher tax rates on lower valued property because they don't have the real estate wealth within their communities to fund their services. I'll give you an example. In my district, I represent the Round Lake area, very large Latino population in the Round Lake area. And until the evidence-based model went into effect, the individuals who lived in, a $50,000, $70,000 home were paying 17% in property taxes. And in large part because they didn't have the real estate diversification within their EAV to be able to generate the dollars needed to operate their school districts and all of the other governmental bodies. And we find that minority communities are disproportionately affected by this phenomenon. And I think there's a lot of other social issues that underlie that. But again, I think it just underscores the inequity within our system, and it's something we need to look at. I don't think it's something that we will be able to solve with a single piece of legislation. It's about economic opportunity that otherwise has not been provided to certain communities for one reason or another, and making sure that those economic opportunities, those educational opportunities are there. And I'm cautiously optimistic to say with the evidence-based model is that we're starting to see more state dollars go into those lower income minority communities, which is helping lift up the education system and providing people a more equitable approach to education. I'm sorry, did that answer your question?
I think that,
okay.
Yeah, does either one of you have any thoughts about what we can do as a state? What kind of changes to our property tax system can we make to help even out that balance?
I think too, as we think about this over-reliance on retail sales, incentivizing retail development happening in communities, and you think about the types of infrastructure that communities need, communities that have heavy industrial businesses aren't receiving sort of the same amount of, the same rates of revenues back from the state and office as well. So it's even just thinking within retail, office, and industrial uses, you know, your industrial users are seeing freight trucks move in and out of facilities, but aren't receiving nearly enough money to continue to repair the roads in the ways that they need to. Or if you're thinking about how retail works in a region, you've got people traveling from multiple different communities to one community, and that one community is the community that's seeing the benefit of those dollars that are invested in that community. Now we'll see what happens when the new sales tax, fair playing, I have the name here, it's very long and wonky.
Yeah.
Let's see. The Leveling the Playing Field for Illinois Retail Act goes into effect in January, right? Which, again, provides some sales taxes to the locality where the purchase was made, as opposed to, you know, where just coming to the state overall. But, you know, those are the types of things that we need to be talking about, is that the user-based system, that we're looking at the infrastructure that's necessary to provide those services and then evaluating them as we think about tax reform.
All right, I think we can, I'm going to have one question, but I'm going to save it to the end. Audience time. I bet you guys have some questions. Go ahead, gentleman in the front there. Oh, wait, Adam's going to bring you a mic.
He's right behind.
Yep, he's coming. Around the other shoulder. Oh, there, Lawrence.
Thank you, Lawrence. So there's a proposal for a fair tax. And one of the ideas is going to lower my property tax. But this is government doing it. So what are you guys doing that if I vote for this fair tax, that I actually see property taxes reduced? And the second half is, every time someone says referendum, is the word binding before that? Because when I hear referendum, I hear, we'll ask them and then we'll do what we want anyway. Thank you.
Yeah. So as far as the fair tax goes, and I'm going to be totally transparent, I am not aware that it's being marketed as a way to reduce property taxes. There's about $100 million in property tax relief that is included with that. I have not heard it billed as a way to substantially reduce property taxes. So I'm not sure where you got that from. When you look at the fair tax, you know, one of the things that Carol mentioned, which I thought was very interesting, is that when you talk about tax reform, that people think that means a tax reduction. My belief is that we have to do tax restructuring in terms of where we're generating our revenue from and pulling it off of the property tax system. Now, if the voters approve the fair tax, that will be a revenue stream that could potentially be used in the future. I think Dawn Clark-Netsch proposed a type of exchange. I think Edgar proposed an exchange at one point that could potentially be used as a taxing apparatus to move education funding off of property taxes. Really, the only taxing mechanism that has the volume and capacity to replace the property tax would be the income tax. And that would have to be a discussion at a future date if the voters approve this to say, is this something that the state of Illinois wants to do?
Let's see, who else out there? I think I saw some other hands. Come on, property tax questions. Everybody loves to hate on the property tax. All right, go ahead. Oops, wait for the mic.
This sort of relates to the previous discussion as well. With the opposition to the legislature to a variety of different reform measures, could any of the greater support be enlisted if these were all linked to economic development? Illinois has one of the worst business environments in the country, and part of the big thing is the tax system. If, in fact, all these other measures, whether it's education, administration, streamlining, or whatever, can save money and reduce taxes, that should also improve the overall economic development potential for the state of Illinois.
I'll take a shot. So I'm in the process of putting together a manufacturers advisory council in my district coming up the first week of November, and I called a former RTA member I served on that board with, who owns a machinery business in Holly. And I said, I'd like you to come participate in this event. We're going to have some DCEO folks out. We're going to talk about new state programs coming out. He said, I might not be the right guy to be there because I'm in the process of moving my business to Mississippi. So I said, great, we'll leave an empty chair for you. But he went right down the list to your point. He said, the Minimum Wage Act affects me dramatically. And I'm not picking on anybody here. This is
Notice how he pointed at me.
Transparent conversation. The Minimum Wage Act will affect him dramatically, not only with having to increase his rate on existing employees, but employees already at that $15 rate aren't going to want to stay there if their new help coming in down the road is going to be making the same amount of money. He said he'll be saving over $1 million in the next 10 years in property taxes. In properties he'll be conducting his business in Mississippi. The potential for a fair tax plan or a graduated tax plan that will be in front of all of the voters in November of 2020. That too potentially could have an effect on taxes that people are going to have to pay, not only on corporate taxes, but also on income taxes, because there are no guarantees in either the brackets that are established or the rates. We asked for that during negotiations of that bill in Springfield, and there was no discussion to even be open to that concept. So some of the current legislation that is being run in Springfield today is having that detrimental effect on economic development. I remember a hearing at Appropriations with the new director of DCEO, a young woman with a very strong background in government and in business. And I asked her specifically, are you going to get involved in legislative issues that are driving business away from this state? She wasn't sure how to answer the question. She was brand new on the job. But I'm certainly hoping DCEO is going to be putting together programs that will reduce some of those burdens on our businesses, that will raise revenues and raise salaries by increasing the economic development in this state. The capital bill. Nobody wants to invest in a state that's not investing in their infrastructure. I saw that in my local role as a mayor in St. Charles. I supported the capital bill that hopefully we'll see those same results in the state as well. I hope that answers your question.
And I think it was right next to you, wasn't it? Did you have a question too?
Sure, it's related to this issue. My name is Rachel Weber, and I'm not a political consultant. I'm a university professor, and in fact, I had the opportunity to give testimony in the TIF subcommittee of the task force. And I guess also related to this last question and the previous conversation is that I think, there seems to be a kind of consensus that inefficiencies in school districts are sort of the primary reason why we have high property taxes in Illinois. But I would say, that it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. And just looking at the different subcommittees that you have as part of the task force shows all the different factors that are likely to contribute to that. And I would say, if I was putting on my political consultant hat, that you're less likely to have pushback or more likely to have success with whatever comes out of this committee if these sort of different constituencies can bear some of the burden and sort of feel some of the pain. If it's all about blaming school administrators and people feeling very sort of protective about the quality of their schools and saying that they're going to be the ones who are going to have to make sacrifices. That strikes me as a little bit unfair, given that there are already so many different forms of property tax relief, primarily that we offer to commercial and industrial property owners, whether that is at the local level with various forms of abatements and classification, or it's tax increment financing. But my colleagues and I at the university have done studies and have found that there are commercial and industrial property owners that are essentially triple dipping in terms of taking advantage of abatements, being in a TIF district and receiving some sort of allocation from the municipality, then also being in an enterprise zone. So on the surface, and I'm not discounting the story that you just told about the business that moved to Mississippi, or that is planning to, but it strikes me that the sort of share of the property tax burden that commercial and industrial property owners are carrying relative to residential property owners is another sort of piece of this, in that there may need to be some pain on their part, as well as those people who rely on, school funding, and residential property owners who don't necessarily want to see the quality of their schools suffer as a result of this sort of restructuring.
Did you include Cook County when you're looking at the not carrying their share? Because in Cook County, the classification system is a pretty dramatic shift from residential onto commercial property. I'm sorry, but go ahead, you guys.
Well, I was just going to add this concept of regional economic development is somewhat fledgling here. We've got World Business Chicago, we've got DCEO, we've got a new organization that CMAP is working pretty closely with and the county board chairs are, called the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation. But I think it was identified in the 2050 plan that we're one of the only regions that doesn't have sort of this regional entity that's looking at economic development more comprehensively. And I think we need to get out of this mindset of, moving business from the suburbs to the city or the city to the suburbs is a good thing. It's not a win for anybody. It's not a win for the region, because that's not how our economy works, right? It might be good for some people who get to live closer to their work or not, but it's about, businesses moving to Mississippi or other places and us being more competitive globally and nationally.
Yeah, we've got time for one more question. All right, go ahead, Lawrence. He's loud. Oh, you have a question.
Thanks to our panel. But do you, in your serving on the commission or the task force related to property tax, in the testimony you hear, do people make the connection to how Illinois is an outlier in the number of governments and the number of governments in despair related to the property tax burden?
I'm sorry, or do our constituents connect that we have too many layers of government?
Yes.
Yes. At least in my district. I mean, that's something that I've been a vocal advocate of, is government consolidation. I used to be a township supervisor. I actually, within about 6 months of being in that position, I said, this is a completely useless position. It's a waste of money. We need to get rid of it. And all the other elected township officials around the state of Illinois really liked that. But yes, Lawrence, I do believe that people in my district recognize that we have too many units of government. But I don't want to speak for the entire state. I don't know if Senator DeWitt.
They get it. I think my constituents certainly understand the problem. And every time these issues come up, there was so much discussion about townships. That's now a buzzword on everybody, on the tip of everyone's tongue. What are we doing about township government? The school district issue has been around for years. Why are my school taxes so high? I wanted to add one piece of information regarding my story. That gentleman moving to Mississippi called DCEO and said, what kind of programs do you have to help me stay in Illinois? And the answer was none. And that's why he's picking up his business and moving. So the competitiveness of economic development will continue to be a factor that every government, I don't care if it's a township, a municipality, a county, a state, is going to have to deal with moving forward. We just have to be smarter about how we deal with it.
Well, I think we got a question from Chairman Cronin.
I just, so the professor, your question and your observation, I agree with you. You're spot on. It is a difficult, complicated issue. Property tax is a system that's grown up and developed over a long period of time, a lot of vested interests. And so we have local school boards, of course. We won't believe in local control, but let's face it, you got collective bargaining and you got mandates that basically tell local school boards what they have to do on curriculum and how they have to, agree in contracts. So, but I guess my question is this: listening to your observation and agreeing with you that these issues are complex, and also recognizing the fact that back in 1990, I was part of an effort to reform the property tax system, and much of the same language that we've heard today was emphatically stated, and a lot of passionate speakers back in 1990. So, but we do have this task force. There are 88 people. There are 7 subcommittees. I would, sort of guess that the 7 subcommittees are supposed to sort of identify 7 of the contributing causes or 7 issues that are necessary to address property tax reform in a meaningful way. Do you anticipate that there will be recommendations, specific pieces of legislation coming out of each one of those subcommittees on pension reform, on consolidation, on whatever all those topics are? Will we see something meaningful and tangible? Because my fear is this is all window dressing. This is all, you got 88 members, they all get to say they're on the property tax reform task force, they get to put it in their literature, they tell everybody they're fighting for it, and once again, nothing happens. So, I would at least like to see a commitment that there will be specific legislative proposals addressed at each one of these subject matters coming out. And then we have something to look at in Transform Illinois, we can put our arms around that and we can try to advocate for that.
Yeah, Dan, you really hit the nail on the head in terms of asking, is this window dressing? And Senator DeWitt and I have had a number of private conversations as it pertains to this. When this first started, there was, I got a lot, I don't know about the senator, but I got a lot of questions and kind of laughter, like, oh, it's another task force. So, you have fun, you're going to send out a piece of mail on it. And my response was, I'm not wasting my time with something that isn't going to achieve anything. That isn't who I am as a person. And we've reached a crisis level as it pertains to property taxes. And I think one of the things that I quite honestly, Dan, have been really taken aback by is with these subcommittees and with the meetings, we're achieving quorums at these meetings. Members are actively participating. One of the concerns that I had was we'd have the initial meeting and then no one would come after moving on. And I've had conversations with a lot of people, and we are all a little taken aback that we are consistently having a quorum at these meetings. So to me, that shows that there is a high level of interest in achieving something. But also, too, by the end of October, in veto session, we will be reconvening the entire commission to release the preliminary recommendations. Under the state statute, we have 90 days after it was signed into law to do the preliminary results, and then the final results are due by December 31st with legislation being introduced in January. And I'll give everyone a heads up here, is the legislation that I intend that this commission will introduce is going to be very serious legislation that is going to finally address the need to restructure our tax code in the state of Illinois. Now, when I tell you that now, because when this gets put together in a bill, you're going to have a lot of special interest groups who are going to feel really uncomfortable with it. But in order to move beyond this property tax crisis, and I believe it was brought up that everyone's got to shoulder some of the burden here, and that's going to make people uncomfortable, and that's going to send people in tailspin, but then that's going to fall back on the General Assembly having the political willpower to push it through. We do have a governor who has point blank said on repeated occasions he is fully committed to reforming the property tax system. So,
It's encouraging. Yeah, and Chairman, I would agree. The last meeting I had on this specific subject was with a group of homeowners over the age of 55 up in Elgin. And it's not so much, gee, good luck on the task force, we hope you guys are productive. The message to me was, you better do something because we're pissed. Yeah. Pardon my French. But people get this. People are aware of this issue. It's dire. If we don't, we're at a crisis. If we don't come up with meat and potatoes, real resolve to make some changes and have an effect, you're right, it's going to be nothing but window dressing and we're all going to have egg all over our face. I'm not going to do that. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
One last little comment from each of the three of you, in as short a sentence as possible. A year from now, what would you like to be able to come back and say, we did this, we did that, or in your case, Aaron, they did this, they did that, and I think it was a good thing. What do you hope we can say?
Sure, I'll start. One of the things that we supported last legislative session was Cook County Assessor's effort to get more transparent data to be able to evaluate property tax assessments. And so I think that, that was focused on Cook County, and then by I guess other counties passing, amendments to be able, or authorization for them to be able to do that, it would be statewide, but to see that as a statewide initiative, I think would be really great.
I would summarize my comments by hoping to have a process started that has moved the weight of school funding from property tax owners back to the state. And at the same time because again, these things take time, and to have started the process of consolidating those local fire and police pension funds, again, that drop savings directly to the local taxpayers in every municipality that are affected by those pension funds.
I would just put it simply, property tax crisis averted.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to this panel. We really appreciate it. Next up is Josh Ellis from the Metropolitan Planning Council. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
All right, this will be super quick because you've already been gracious enough to spend most of your afternoon with us. I'm Josh Ellis from MPC, your host today. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all of our Transform Illinois partners from DuPage County to the Civic Federation to CMAP and to our sponsor ComEd. This is the 5th year of this forum. It's the 5th year of this group. We will be back for year 6, and I would encourage you to bring a skeptic with you. Like, bring someone next year. Bring someone who needs to hear this. Bring someone from your local school board. Bring someone from your family. Bring someone from your business. Bring someone and help us build this base. 2, in the pamphlets that are on your chairs is a list of Transform Illinois members. If you're a civic organization or an individual lawmaker who's interested in being a part of this, just grab me afterwards. Academic institutions accepted as well. Just let me know and we can talk about it. 3, to Aaron's point about retail sales, the holidays are coming up. Please go to a store. Please resist the temptation to pay Jeff Bezos for your holiday gifts and support a local business. So in all seriousness, I think a lot of what you've heard today, a large part of it, we were talking about school districts. We could have had a very similar conversation about transportation systems, water utilities, housing districts, all of the services that our governments provide. The fragmentation that pervades throughout Illinois and informs a lot of these tax issues is not normal. Illinois is not normal, and I think that's a thing to remember. The tagline, the name of our organization is Transform Illinois. People often ask, what are you trying to transform it to? I think we'd like to transform it to a normal state in the year 2019. And I think all of you can be a part of that by continuing to talk about these things and make sure that your legislators know this time of year and then after the veto session is a great time to go talk to your legislators and let them know that you are also a special interest called a citizen of Illinois and you have a higher expectation for how we're going to do things. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you next year.